Welcome, guys. It's nice to see you all. I hope you're all feeling happy and calm and excited for the week ahead. So, just a bit of what to expect from this evening. So, we're going to start with a discussion. Probably about half of the session, we're just going to have a chat about yoga and injury, and then we're going to get into the prenatal. We'll have a break, and then we'll do some prenatal, and that'll be fun. So, if you guys can have your preggy bellies ready, and we'll enjoy that second half of the session. So I so there was some pre-reading for this evening, but you can be honest, did we get to that? No. Okay, that's fine. It's no problem. I actually like that we're going to have this discussion first so that when you start reading the notes after, it's for additional information. But the intention of this session is actually more discussion based. And so we're actually going to be questioning what we should or should not be doing in certain situations. And that additional, the textbook is or the manual is quite extensive in that yoga for injury section. Those aren't, it's kind of giving you some insights into various things, but you don't need to study and know them. It's for your own benefit, really. If you want to, it's good to read through it. And then even for the prenatal, it goes to a lot of detail in there. And I'm also going to send you guys an article on WhatsApp, but you guys know that that's all there for additional fun evening reading. When you're just chilling at the end of the day and you just feel like relaxing with a nice book, you can take out your manual. So I'm actually going to ask you guys unless you've got some major background noise, to unmute yourself. So the first topic is going to be particularly around yoga and injury. And I want you guys to share your insights before we get into the nitty-gritty parts of it. So for those of you guys, I don't know how long everyone's been practicing or where you are and where you were practicing before, but I would like to hear your input to start off with as to when you go to a yoga class and the teacher starts and says, I would like you guys to let me know what injuries you have. So the first point of conversation is going to be around when we start our class, do we ask whether anyone has injuries or do we not ask? And then if you vote for yes or no, I want you to tell me some reasoning why, and then why you would ask, why you would not ask. And then we're going to look at a little bit of the discussion in between that. Yes, Sasha.
So this is something I always hear, and I believe it's important. I believe we should ask because I believe you should know, but I've never been in a yoga class where they've actively done something about it. So it's always, are there any injuries? Okay, you've got a sore knee. And then every now and again in the class, they go, just be careful, but that's not actually helping anyone. So I think, yes, we should ask, but then also do something, like make proper modifications. Don't just be careful, because that's not really helpful, in my opinion.
So why would you say you would want to ask so that you can proper modify? Is that kind of your reasoning as to why you think yoga teachers should ask?
I think so. And I think also so that people are aware not to just throw themselves into a pose that hurts them. I think as adults, which is something we spoke about on the kiddies course, like adults are more inclined to kind of go into ego and push themselves because the person next to me is doing it. So if you know this person's shoulder hurts, then maybe you can say, okay, for you, instead of bringing your shoulder like this, do this, whatever it might be, just so that you can actually teach them. And
I'm gonna
demonstrate something.
Yeah. So my role this evening is every time you say something, I'm probably going to ask another question back. So not necessarily to say who's right or wrong, but I'm just going to give you guys hypothetical situations. Because let's say, for example, you're a teacher and you're starting off your class and someone says, or you ask, what injuries do you have? And someone comes up and says, pes anserine bursitis. And what do you say? What do you say to them? What would you guys say if someone says something you've never heard of? English, please. That is English. I'm pretty sure that's not. So if someone says something that you don't know what it is, what is your response to that?
I think be honest.
I agree.
You're not a doctor.
Okay, one. That's a good point. Demi, you want to add to that?
I think maybe you should ask them what does that mean for them, because also certain things different people experience differently. So maybe they can then say, well, when this and this happens, it hurts my back like this, or sometimes when I sit down in a funny way, this happens, or I can't sit with legs crossed because something goes numb or whatever. Then you can keep that in mind and take note of the positions that include those movements, and then give them modifications that can maybe allow them to still be a part of the class, but not necessarily further, impact the injury.
Sorry, I quickly want to interrupt you there. I'm going to come back to that thought now. Just for those who have just joined us, I pretty much just asked whether we would ask or whether we wouldn't ask what injuries are in the class. And then we've kind of gone on to say, what if you ask for an injury and you have no cooking clue what they just told you? So my question then to you, Demi, would be, do you think it's a teacher's responsibility to know the particular signs or symptoms of an injury? If we feel, by asking what injury do you have, do you think that there is, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer it, but do you think that there is an expectation that what their answer is? So let me just rephrase that because I stumbled a bit. So if I say, what injury do you have? Is there kind of this expectation that I know what your answer means or understands it, or I have some form of insight into it? What do you think?
I wouldn't say no. I just think that, we're using the physical body. So if there's something on your physical body that's negatively impacting you, you would want to just take note of that, because maybe you see them struggling, or maybe they stop, and in the back of your mind, you can just say, okay, they've stopped. I'm aware they have an injury. Maybe that's the reason, instead of maybe hyper focusing on them. And then mid-class, they're like, oh, sorry, I have a sore knee, or I don't know. I know for me, when I've been sore or have had an injury, or my knee sometimes does play up, I find it better for myself to tell the teacher beforehand, because then I'm like, okay, they know. So if I go into child's pose, or if I stop, or if I tell them I want to do this, but my knee's hurting when I do this, what else can I do? Then they're aware as to, just that, having that awareness. But me as the person who's injured, I don't have an expectation that they're supposed to know, because they're a yoga instructor. They're not a whatever else. So I guess then for the instructor to just be clear on that, to say, okay, well, let me know where I can help you, or, just be open and honest and transparent about what you can and can't do for that person. And maybe you can have a space where they can discuss before the class even starts, where you can say, like, I don't necessarily, I'm not a doctor, but I want to let you have the best experience possible here. So having that in my awareness will help the atmosphere of the whole class.
What's kind of, did you want to say something very similar to that, Sasha? Did you put your hand? Oh,
linked to that, but not the same. No.
Yeah, I'll come to you now. So if I'm asking and the person's telling me, if I don't understand the inclusions or the effects of that injury, how will I know how to modify? Pain in the knee is so different, like someone pain or discomfort or all of these different sensations, they're so subjective. Everyone has a different experience of it. And so it's also not very likely that students will know exactly the pain or exactly why they're experiencing it, or know all the details, not all the time at least. So if they then tell me, okay, I've got this injury, and I don't know what it is, how will I know how to modify for that injury if I don't know what the injury is? I'm just giving a generic response, really. So if I'm giving something generic, do I then even need to ask? Because it doesn't matter whether you have a bursitis or a patella tendon or a this, because my response is going to be the same regardless. I mean, even if someone experienced something, what would your very generic response be? You kind of said touches of it already.
Are you asking me?
Either one of you, if you want to answer.
I guess, yeah, it would just be the point of awareness. So if you need to stop, you can. If you want me to help you and you can tell me what's happening, then I will happily come over and assist. Just, I don't know, maybe it just makes me as the instructor feel comfortable as well, that I know what's going on with the students. But I do understand what you're saying. Like, it's kind of like, I don't want to say pointless, but
I'm going to come to Celine, and then I'm going to come to you, Helene. Do you want to add anything, Celine?
I think the whole thing about you dealing with somebody's injury, or even just asking before a class, a lot of people think that if you say, if you ask them who has an injury just before we start or something, there's this expectation that you actually have the answers of how to fix them from classes that I've been to. And, there's this expectation, oh no, I can help everybody now. I'm going to cure whatever you have. But I also think that it just comes with being or knowing which type of students you have, because if it's somebody that's new, and maybe they have a serious injury or condition, maybe they just won't feel comfortable with telling you. So it really depends with just knowing who your students are, or trying to build that trust or some sort of thing. Because I remember I didn't feel comfortable once telling a yoga teacher about one of my injuries, but then during the class, she told me to change this and adjust this and adjust this, but there was no personal time to actually tell her I have an injury without anybody else like wanting to hear. So I don't know, you maybe just speak to them a lot more softer, or come closer to them and ask them, are you okay, instead of speaking too loudly. I just think it's like really sensitive, because also if you say, let me help you modify the pose, some people that come to your yoga class can actually, like, as bad as it sounds, some people are nasty and might blame you and say, you caused this injury, you did this, you did that. So you have to be very conscious and mindful of how you actually approach this.
So we'll come into, like, there was a couple of things that you mentioned there that we'll carry on discussing throughout this. But I think the one thing you mentioned there is that the time factor. All right. So when people come into the class, you guys will see this when you start teaching, there's some people arrive like 10 to 15 minutes early. A lot of people don't. So you generally front of desk, people are coming in, everyone's sharing information with you. Some studios might even have a noble silence, which means they don't like there to be a lot of chatter before the time. They prefer that the studio is quiet for those who want to go in and do meditation. It's very different for every environment. So there will be different kind of situations that happen depending where you teach. But now if you're teaching a class of 30 to 40 people, I mean, we even see just in our group of 15, there's quite a couple of different injuries or different niggles that people are working with. So when you're teaching a class of 30, if every single one of them came in and said, my shoulder, my knee, my big toe is sore, my wrist hurts when I do this, that's a lot of expectation on you as a teacher. So it's almost impossible for you to be running around modifying and chatting to everyone to see, oh, you're okay, maybe we can kind of modify on the spot, because you also want to keep the flow of the class going. So as teachers, you suddenly, like, when we think about this, we go, okay, is that really viable? Do I even have the time to do that? All right. That's something to think about. Helene, did you want to add, or even if it's a different topic?
No, I think it is a good idea to just, when someone signs up at a yoga studio, to just have a chat about where they are. But I understand that when you're teaching at a bigger studio, you probably won't have time to know all the students in the class. So that's fine. But I think it also depends on what kind of sort of yoga environment, I guess, one creates. And I'm thinking here of a yoga studio that I used to go to, where the teacher had this kind of hyper masculine competitive approach, and a lot of it was about just him showing off, like showing people how great he was at like handstand and crone or whatever, and then forcing people who come to yoga for the first time into these crazy poses, and you never see these people again. Like you can see that they were completely overwhelmed. And I know that, people, I know of one woman who still thinks that she got injured in that class because he was sort of just not forcing anyone, but there's this kind of competitive pressure in the class. And I think when you teach, there should be a kind of safety for various abilities and varying sort of body types and various stages of yoga, and within that kind of culture of acceptance, hopefully people with injury will feel comfortable, not like going into child's pose when they need to, without worrying that they, not doing the thing right.
Cool. Thanks so much. I'm going to feed off that now. I'm just going to give everyone who's just joined us a little bit of a quick summary. So we just started off with asking, when you start teaching yoga class, do you ask or do you not ask whether there are injuries present in the studio? And we're kind of looking at why you would ask and why you wouldn't ask. We spoke about we would then want to possibly help or modify or whatever like that. And then then I asked the counter argument, is it our responsibility or is it even our role as a yoga teacher to firstly understand injuries, secondly, know how to modify for every injury, and then also just the logistics of when you start a class, like do you have the time and the capacity to think on your feet and do all of these things? So just taking, because we kind of said that in different contexts, it'll be different. A gym will be different than a studio, might be different than a home-based studio where you've only got 4 people and you do know them all personally. Do you guys think that as a role as a teacher, just for those who join now, do you think it's important, or do you even think it's our responsibility or our role to understand yoga injuries and to modify and adapt, or I guess modify is probably just the right word for that.
So I have hi guys, I'm sorry I'm a little late. It's been a long week. I was going to say, so as somebody who actually has certain limitations in terms of yoga, I tend to tell the teacher that I have this, what my limitations are, but I don't like to say it to them publicly. So for example, we hate when teachers say, who has the injuries? And people just start raising their hands. Like, I like when the teacher says, can I, please tell me privately, like we can discuss this after the class, or we can just go, like I usually tend to tell for the class because I want everybody to know what my issues are. And then the second thing I was going to say is, if they don't tell you, how are you supposed to know what their injuries are, right? Like, it's really hard. Like, you can see that, for example, shoulder flexion, you got to be proud of this, Taryn, not as, is not as good, or is as like, I'm not flexible as other people, but there's injuries that you just simply can't see. And so if they don't tell you, how can you be responsible for somebody's, getting injured in a class if you don't have that knowledge?
Well, that brings up another thing, is that a lot of times, I don't know about you guys, I've gone into a lot of classes with a so-called injury and I didn't tell the teacher because I didn't think that it was their responsibility to know what I'm experiencing in my body. And maybe being a yoga teacher, I was like, okay, I know what to do for myself. But just how many times have you guys gone into a class and have you actually gone out of your way to speak to the teacher, or have you actually raised your hand to tell them? Some of you might say, yes, you did, because you feel like it might have been the norm that was established in certain environments. But now we get to ask, okay, once we give that teacher the information, what are they doing with it? If we're giving a generic, we spoke about earlier, you tend to give a generic response like, listen to your body. If you feel any discomfort, back off. But it doesn't matter what anyone says to me, I will generally respond, look, listen to your body. If you feel any discomfort, back off. So it kind of makes that entire interaction where they're telling you the injuries void in a certain extent if you're giving them the same generic input. Because as yoga teachers, our role is to teach yoga, right? So we don't have a scope of practice, like we can't diagnose, we definitely can't treat any injuries. And so we might provide a modification, which is still a generic modification, right? We might know that propping or putting like a little foam under the back knee will help if there's knee pain, but doesn't mean this knee pain or that knee pain or whatever. And maybe it works for some people and it might not also work for other people, right? So it kind of opens up this can of worms where we go, well, it really depends, right? But I said for those who have just joined, if I actually just want to go to a show of hands because I didn't see earlier, it seems like we've got a couple of people who kind of said, yes, we should ask for injuries. Who thinks you should ask? We've got quite a couple of hands. Okay. Who thinks you shouldn't ask? Who's not so sure and maybe change their mind at the end of this. So for those who just joined, I'm going to just ask the same question again, just so we can all have the same context. But let's say I come into one of your guys' class, maybe Caroline or Eva, who've just joined, and you guys ask, God, is there any injuries? And then I say, yeah, I've got pes anserine bursitis. Then like, what will you say to that?
I have two. Before I answer that, I want you to think about the answer to me is, do yoga teachers have any ethical obligations towards their students? Because I, as a lawyer, I know exactly what my obligations are towards the clients. So I kind of, but if you were to tell me what your injuries are, and I have no idea what it is, I would just ask and say, can you please explain to me what the injuries are and what does it feel like in your body, or what limitations do you feel like you have? And so usually people would say, well, I can't often do chaturangas because my wrist hurts. And so then you can say, well, can you example on like dolphin plank or something, and like just try to find ways where it hurts, how it feels, and then try to see if you can find modifications. But of course, you're not going to know everything. And I think that's where the role of also like, what are your ethical obligations are coming in? Do you have any towards the students, or do you just provide that service so that they feel included in your class and don't necessarily get injured because they might not know their bodies the way you do?
Well, you said, do they not know their bodies the way you do? Who do you think knows their body more, the teacher or the student?
So I was going to say, I know my body better, but I might not know the modification that you can provide to me. And I think Helene just raised the question of the peer pressure when you are in a class, because you want to do everything like the rest of us do. And so I know my body better, but if I don't know the modification, I see others going fully out there, I would probably push myself if I don't know how to modify it, and that's okay.
So, and in that point, just do any of you two have a response to that, or are you chatting something different?
I kind of am along those lines of just, it does depend where you are in your practice. Because if you're a complete beginner and you don't know what movement I'm doing, not that I now know your body better because I don't, but I know the movement that I've, set out for today better. So if you say my knee is, wow, it's so sore, and like I have a whole lot of kneeling poses, and I say, okay, well, is that going to hurt you? Yes, I can just give a generic stay off your knees. Or instead of, which we spoke about a lot with Catherine, of that, or well, not really spoke about, but listened to, of that, teach, don't demonstrate. So it, to me, would make more sense to then with that person say, okay, so we're going to keep you off your knees to the best of our abilities. But that doesn't mean I'm fixing the problem. If it hurts, go into child's pose, or, because I'm not a doctor, but it does have to do with their practice, because for most of us, I'm sure we could go in and just know, I'm not going to go on my knee hurts. I know what to do around that. And I know how I can be, that won't hurt my knee. But if you're very new to the practice, then you might just feel that peer pressure of, okay, everyone else is doing it. Let me just try. And then you hurt yourself even more. I don't know.
So yes, let me get all your responses, and then I'm going to come back at you. Karen?
I don't know how exactly, I'm struggling to like articulate this or put this, to break this down in my mind. So I don't know if it'll be clear, but I think that it links in with what Sasha had said about the beginners. I think it's what has helped me along my journey is having teachers who kind of bring about that thought of awareness of the body and being aware of your own body, because not everyone walks in with that awareness. So I don't think it's entirely the teacher's role it's not the teacher's responsibility. Like, as you said, like we're not physiotherapists or doctors. I mean, some teachers are, but not everyone is, and I feel like it wouldn't be fair for the student to walk in expecting that kind of, unless it's a private, let's say, for example. I don't know how that exactly works, but I feel like if a teacher can keep bringing in that thought of just awareness of the body and as you said, like, and I think it was Eva, just like noticing, if let's say a student says, okay, I have like this thing, and then what Eva said was so great about like, how does it feel? Like, where does it hurt? Okay, you can do that. But I also don't think I feel like it's a middle ground, because I also don't think a teacher should walk in and just be like, okay, whatever, just do whatever you want, get into chaturanga. So it's definitely about you as an individual teacher, like finding your middle ground and how you want to teach and your capacity, like how can you accommodate your students. But it's such a good question, because I've never thought about this. Really, really good question.
So I just want to thanks so much, Caroline. That was really quite insightful. A lot of things added in there. Karen, you took your hand down. Did you still want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to add, is it like dance class where as soon as, and I should imagine it is because of the kind of activity this is, that you sign an indemnity form that should something happen to you in that class, the teacher is not responsible. You can be a caring person and say, if you have any issues, take care and be mindful. As Caroline said, be mindful about how you move. Helping someone comes with being an experienced teacher over time as well. The more you get to know the poses and things like that, the more you're able to help and offer different advice. It also depends on if you're having a beginner class or if you've got old yogis coming for a nice vinyasa flow and they just jump right into it. Then no, you don't have to ask. If it's a new people doing yoga and they've signed their indemnity forms, as a sweet gesture, you can ask them, yes. Anyone got injuries? Be mindful, blah, blah, blah.
So that's an interesting one. And I think it links to what Eva said about ethical obligations. And let's just talk about legal obligations just quickly. So most of the time, people will come in and sign a waiver. I would highly recommend them for you guys as teachers. It's a different context depending on where you teach. But in South Africa, you can definitely take out public liability. You can get insurance as a yoga teacher. It's not a very common thing that teachers do. It's usually the standard practice is to get a waiver, which is usually set up by the studio. Of course, if you're teaching by yourself, it's usually a generic thing that people have downloaded off the internet. But on that paper, they will write their name, their emergency contact number, they'll write their injuries down there. I can tell you in the 4 years of teaching, I not very often get the chance to read that paper before I teach the class. It comes back to time, right? So they've written it down there and they've disclosed that, yes, I have this medical injury, which when they write it down, it almost implies that you are now informed that they have an injury, which is not always the case, because once again, as a yoga teacher, what if I don't know the injury? Do I have to understand it? I can sit there and go, okay, where does it hurt, whatever. But in that, trying to understand their injury is in some way wanting to either understand it, diagnose it, or treat it. Where fixing, like you guys have said, fixing a problem, even to a certain extent, physios can't diagnose. I mean, with certain biomechanical or certain muscular issues, they can, but there's a lot of even health practitioners. I know for myself as an OT, I'm not allowed to diagnose, even with a 4-year medical or health practitioner's degree. It needs to be diagnosed by a medical professional first. So on your form, it often says, I have consulted with my medical practitioner who approves that I'm in good health. And I would actually just like to know by show of hands, who went to their doctor and said, Doc, I'm thinking of starting yoga. Do you think it's a good call? No, because I mean, if you're in good health, you're mostly fine. But that's just a way that teachers back themselves to say, look, you've gone through the necessary precautions. But often teachers realistically don't have the time to read that. Or if your first class was a week ago with another teacher, and now you're in my class, I definitely haven't dug out that paper from the file archives at the back there to read about the injury. So, and even then, how much do I know about it? So what I really like what Caroline said, and I think that's going to be our biggest point of discussion today, is you can definitely focus on somatic kind of cueing that says, listen to your body, maybe you want to close your eyes, notice the sensations that might come up. Once again, feeding into empowering your students so that they can take responsibility of their own bodies. Because just as much as you guys said, maybe we've kind of established the student knows their body best, but that also being said, it's like if we can empower our students and they are responsible for their practice. Like, I'm here to guide you and I'm here to teach the class. I'm not here to understand what you are feeling, because we will never ever know what someone's feeling. Even the concept of, we don't go into pain science here, but even pain is such a subjective experience. One person might feel something super, like just a small little niggle, and it might be painful, and then someone else might experience discomfort and still want to push through. I'm trying to think of and I'll actually ask you guys, have you ever been in a yoga class and felt discomfort and continued? Right? Did it bother? Never ever. I don't know, guys. I feel a lot of discomfort in things like when I'm doing half handstand, it's chaturangas. Like my perception is like, oh, this is uncomfortable, but I'm fine. So I've decided what is my boundary? I've decided for my own body, this is too much or this is not enough, right? I've been in a class where a teacher said to me like, no, you're doing too much, stop. And I was like, no, I think I got another one in me because I've decided I'm fine. So teachers might use generic views to be like, oh, you look like you're straining, you look, how do we know, right? We're not in their body. Maybe you guys can think back to a time when you were in the class where a teacher told you to do something or not do something, but you were actually fine. Maybe it's never happened to you at all, and that's also fine. Just depends. Sasha?
Speaking about people thinking you can now treat them because they've told you their injury, got me thinking of that. There's a lot of that, like in the yoga community. I see a lot of it, especially online. It's like yoga for sprained ankles or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, so that's yoga not on the ankle, but it's not. It's yoga to fix the ankle magically somehow, and I think that can be really problematic. And if you do get people who come to you and it's, oh, I have a back injury, I heard yoga's gonna help. It depends again on the injury, because maybe it is just a matter of strengthening things and the pain will go away, but maybe it's not. And maybe you're going to end up really damaging someone and it's not your problem and it shouldn't be. So I do think from that perspective, because there is this idea of I don't want to say like yoga rehabilitation, but it kind of becomes that sort of idea. You can't do that, certainly not in like a gym or a studio where you've got 30 students. You can't have like a rehab session for one person's ankle. Just, yeah.
I think it's a good point to make, because I think Caroline said some people will be doctors or physios or biokineticists and be yoga teachers. But even then, as a health professional, they've taken an oath as to how they also work within their scope of practice. So each profession, I mean, we as yoga teachers, we don't necessarily sign up to a board and take an oath and this is what we conduct. And so even things like yoga therapy, yoga rehab, I mean, those are, it's like, as yoga goes on, it's like that line becomes narrower and narrower, because it's like, okay, but what is therapy? Because we have this connotation and this understanding of it. And so we might believe, yes, there are benefits to yoga, but we're not therapists, right? So the same thing with rehab, it's starting to understand what is our scope of practice. And we know we haven't even touched on enough injuries here to know where people might be experiencing pain, what are the modifications, how do you treat it? Because that's not our scope of practice. Chances are they're already going to a physio or a bio that's doing this. And so that they've kind of taken on that rehabilitation treatment process with them. So it is a bit of a problematic in the sense where some teachers feel as though, yes, with this training, it comes with certain level of understanding about the body, but with that, not enough or definitely not enough that we can take on this responsibility, and we shouldn't be really taking on that diagnosing, treating, fixing kind of thing. Eva, what do you have to say?
I was going to say, I have definitely gone to push myself and, did not always end up well. But thinking from a legal perspective, like when you do the indemnification form, you can definitely say, I am, this is not going to cure cancer, whatever you want to put in there, what people think yoga does for you, and indemnify yourself from any injuries. Like don't even bother asking them if actually they go to a doctor and ask them whether yoga is gonna, whether they had permission from the doctor. Like I think you can definitely protect yourself in terms of what responsibilities will you have towards your yoga students. Like if you have no ethical responsibility, we don't take the oath, you need to make sure that you are protected. So in case if people show up thinking that you can magically cure them and want to, sue you. So you can definitely take those steps. I mean, that's just because, I think as a lawyer, but you can definitely make sure that you don't ask the questions that they're going to lie to. You are the person that they understand this is what you're going to get out of it, and this is what you're signing up for. So they don't come later after you saying you overpromised me and I got injured and this happened.
Yeah, and thanks for that. It's nice to have a different, I think this is the first time I've had a lawyer on the course. It's really insightful for that. It's very different in different countries. If you guys go off and teach in different parts of the world, so I mean, I know in the UK, like liability is an essential for a yoga teacher. So different parts have different expectations with regards to signing, registration, insurance. So that will be more applicable to where you actually end up teaching. But yeah, I mean, you definitely do have that liability to say that I do not take responsibility. I've even signed a waiver for an event once where it said, look, listen to your body, and I kind of just want to say also what you said, there's that everyone's coming to yoga with a different understanding of what yoga is. We know people come to their mats for something so super different. Someone might be coming because they've just come off an injury and their doctor said yoga will be good for this, and that's more just a generic blanket statement, because what kind of yoga? Are they now doing a gentle hatha class, or are they doing Bikram? Because those are also very different types of practices. And I completely lost my train of thought. Give me a moment. What did Eva say there? It was a good one. So they might have a very general blanket statement as what, people might be coming because they actually just want to do more meditation and breath work. So everyone's understandings of the benefits of yoga is going to be very different. And unless we have a conversation with them, we won't know what they're expecting of a class. So there is, and Eva, I'll send you guys a podcast. It's actually from Jason Crandall on Yoga Land. And he looks at both arguments. He says, why should I and why shouldn't I? And so his argument, being a yoga teacher in the States, where they do have a little bit of a different culture with regards to indemnity and suing, maybe different than here in South Africa at the moment, where yoga is a bit of a smaller community, he would say that one of the counter arguments was, if I then ask what injury you have and you've told me, am I now responsible to act accordingly? And if you get injured, am I now more liable? By disclosing that information, have you put more responsibility on me to know, to understand, to adapt? And that's his counter argument as to why he would rather not ask, because it's not my scope, it's not my role. If I don't ask, I'm saying to you, he would still start the class and say, look, I am your yoga teacher today. I am here to guide you through your practice. If we get into the class, when we get into the class, I advise that or it's my recommendation that you listen to your body. If you feel any discomfort, back off. Very blanket statement, whether you're actually just feeling tired because you might feel something on one day that you didn't before, I've given you that invitation, or I've given you that suggestion to back off. That brings up, I'm going to come to both of you now. That brings up that argument where you guys said, what if it's a beginner and they don't know how to back off? Then in the yoga class, someone might say, oh, my knee hurts. You can say, drop your knee down. Does that make it better? Yes, cool. I haven't asked you, where's the pain? What's your knee injury? I've given you a modification, which you guys have done in your sequencing. You've spoken about with Laura. You've given them an option. Chances are they're doing less. My wrist hurts in plank. Drop your knees down. Does that help? Yes, happy. I'm going to come to Eva first. Just give me a second. I just want to open the door because my dog is sad. We'll start. Eva, did you want to say something? Oh, we lost her. Okay, let's go to Zama.
Actually, I'm just thankful you mentioned this. What did you say his name was from Yoga Land, who had said that he would not ask? I was starting to feel a bit guilty because when you posed the question, my immediate response was I wouldn't ask. Purely because I've had an experience where I went to a yoga class because I had a knee injury, and the teacher had said it's yoga injury for the knee or whatever, it makes it better on the knees. And I left the class feeling worse than when I had gotten there. And I realized in that moment that the yoga instructor actually is not a health practitioner practitioner. They cannot help you make you feel better about anything. Ultimately, the onus is actually on you to actually feel out your own body. And if you feel you're pushing too hard, then just stop. Because I don't think it should be anybody's responsibility to say, fix your knee this way or do this way. Only you can ultimately know the correction or the modification for that. And to put that responsibility on a yoga teacher, I feel was unfair on my part, because I did that to her. And then it's unfair for so I'm just basically saying I would definitely go for that argument and not ask. Just make a very blank statement and keep going with the class. Unless someone specifically wants to talk to me about something I'm familiar with, then we can have a conversation outside of the class, away from there.
Thanks, Emma. I also just want to add on to that I'm not leaving here saying you should do this or you shouldn't do this. We're having a discussion because when you guys go out here, you're going to make your own decisions about how you want to teach. But this is a nice way to counter arguments. And like Zama said, is that for a very long time, I used to ask, because when I did my 200-hour training, that was the norm. You ask injuries, and I can tell you now, 95% of the time, I didn't change much. I planned my class. I can't adapt for your injury and yours and yours. And particularly in the last year or so, where I started teaching a lot of older practitioners, the injuries are substantial. It's like, this one's got sciatica, that one's coming in with a splint on her wrist. And I'm thinking, why are you here? And someone's got a knee, and that one's got a this. And I mean, I even had someone come in once who had quite a severe neurological condition that I did not know about, honestly. And I asked her, well, no, she actually told me, she offered up the information to her. And I said, look, I've planned this class. This is, you know, you kind of give that information to say, listen to your body. I am now aware that you might modify, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to like tell you doing wrong or whatever. I think that was kind of the idea you guys wanted to set, is that if someone comes into a child's pose, then the teacher might be like, no, we're doing this. And I think that's important reflection for us to notice. If a teacher is telling you can't take a rest or you can't modify your practice, we don't really want to create that space where we feel like people can't do what they want to with their bodies. Oh my gosh, I must actually tell you a story. I was in a class once where I'm actually, it's not the same thing. I was actually in a spinning class. I'm sorry, completely different thing. But I was, like you lean on your handlebars. I was sitting up and I was taking a breath because I was tired. And the teacher called me up and said, would you ride your bicycle like that? Put your hands on the handlebars. And I wanted to say, no, I'm not going to put my hands on the handlebars. So anyway, nothing to do with yoga. But if a teacher had to say to you, no, we're not doing a child's pose, we'll rest later. For an example, I've never had that happen to me and I would never want it. But we wouldn't want that teacher to create that environment. So that's kind of something that I think is quite obvious, that we would be okay if the student took an extra rest, if they did the pose slightly differently. You can tell as a teacher when someone's modifying their when they are unsure, like if they're doing something wrong or when they're modifying. You guys will be able to tell. It's usually in the face. The face usually looks confused. If a beginner comes in and doing something completely different, that wouldn't normally be a modification. And you can definitely make a suggestion and say, I'd recommend maybe dropping your knee down instead. And then you only need to say it once, and when they come back, they know it. So I think someone said there, if a student has a particular question after class as to their yoga practice specifically, you can do that, right? You understand yoga poses enough, not in a way that's going to say, don't do this because your knee is sore. Don't do this, it's going to hurt your shoulder. Because at the same time, we also don't want to instill fear. We don't want to catastrophize and say, oh, if you feel pain, I mean, I feel pain in a class, but it's not bad enough that I've decided I need to stop. Once again, it's a subjective thing. And the more we almost like catastrophize and we say, if you feel pain, don't do it, back off, don't do yoga, suddenly everyone feels almost fearful, like, oh, I'm not going to do camel because my back hurts, or I'm not going to do a low lunge because my knee hurts and something is going to go wrong. It's we kind of have to take that fear mongering out of it. Otherwise, no one's going to want to do yoga anymore, because I mean, there's so many different things. I'm actually just thinking, I try to relate it to other sports because it's something we see a lot in yoga, right? I've never been to a spinning class where a teacher said to me, if your knee hurts, just stop. because like, how am I going to spin, guys? Like, I need to move my knees. But it's something that has really been quite predominant in the yoga space. And we can, encourage that mindfulness, reassure them that they're in charge of their own body, give modifications, but they're not going to stop and leave the class because they've got a sore knee, right? It's just not going to happen. So it's kind of interesting when I started thinking about it related to other sports, even dance, like, yeah, take a rest when you need it, join us when you're ready, kind of thing. What do you have to say, Sasha?
Two things actually, building on that, something I've been thinking about for a long time about this like fearful reinforcement of do this, but be careful. I'm so terrified of headstands and handstands because my mom was convinced I was going to fall on my head and break my neck. So I just never did them because she called me doing them one day and she was like, oh my gosh, please be careful. You're going to break your neck. And then I don't know what I'll do. And like in our inversion class last week, I almost got up the first time. And then after that, I was just like, I'm going to break my neck. And I know I'm not going to break my neck, obviously, but I couldn't get over that because it had been instilled in me. So I just think it's so, I see Demi feels the same. It's just so important, I feel, not to make people scared of yoga poses. Obviously, you don't want them to fling themselves over and hurt themselves, but most people are not going to do that. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that I think I'm leaning more towards not asking for injuries now, but I do still think it very much depends what kind of class you're teaching and where you're teaching it. So at the university, we have a yoga society, and it's a bit more spiritual and gentle flows, and it's all just kind of very yummy and what feels good for you. And that, to me, they don't ask for injuries when we're there, because if something doesn't feel good, you go into child's pose. You go, and it's more meditative movement. And when I've done yoga at the gym, which is not very often because I don't really like it, then it is more competitive. It is an instructor who's doing the whole class and is, in whatever compass pose and is saying, oh, don't worry if you can't get here, but you haven't so in those environments where it is more fast paced and I feel like you're more likely to get hurt, you're not as in tune with your body, which comes back to that body awareness that Caroline spoke about, which I really liked. I wrote down. That's not there for me in the gym classes I've gone to, because it is just kind of more of like a feel the burn, let's get glutes working or whatever it needs to be in that space. And for me, that's where the difference would be.
I actually, I kind of, building on what Sasha said there, is ultimately, almost regardless of what you say as a teacher, the student is still going to decide what they want to do or not, right? Everyone's got their own decision-making power. I've been in a class where I had a little bit of a niggly shoulder, and I think I probably even told the teacher if they asked, because if someone's asking, I might as well just say yes or no or whatever. And I ended up she was like, take it easy. And I was like, I'll do what I want to do anyway. And I ended up doing all my chaturangas, and it was a little bit more sore the next day. I didn't blame the teacher. I was like, Taryn, you should have listened to yourself a bit, right? So I automatically took that responsibility on me because I'm in charge of my body. I'm in charge of my practice. And I think it comes back to that empowering thing, is that if you are planting that idea that regardless of whether they're in your class and they might go in another teacher's class, they might do a self-practice, that is the kind of theme that runs through the whole time, that it's up to me as to how I move. And so, because if I go into another class the next week and they queuing chaturanga, I might naturally just skip it out without feeling like, oh, I need to, because I've been given, not that people feel they need to be given permission, but sometimes they might feel like, oh, okay, it's okay if I don't do other chaturanga. It's fine. It's just yoga. If I need to do a child's pose, it's fine, right? So that's kind of just to get into that more competitive space, because you will probably come across that as you guys start teaching, noticing the different environments. And so once again, it's not your responsibility to dictate everyone's experience, because you won't know. But if you've given and you've created that space where they're aware of that and you're giving them opportunity for that, it's fine. It comes also down to your role as a teacher. But like what Sasha said, I've seen people come into my classes that have said things like, oh, no, I can't, my back, hey, I can't do any back bending because my back. And living in so much fear, I mean, I don't know what is happening because I, can't fully understand the diagnosis and the this and the that. But often it's not. I mean, sometimes medical practitioners will say, just be careful, if it's a serious risky thing. But often they've been told by fitness instructors to just be careful. And you end up being so fearful, like, oh my gosh, I can't put my knee over my toes. I'm going to hurt my knee. But when I climb upstairs, it's fine. If I pick up something off the floor, it's fine. And if we look at it realistically, like yoga is not a very high impact sport, right? We're not running, jumping. We're not doing endurance for long periods of time. We're not loading excessively with weights. So it's not, it's not a very extreme sport, yet we tend to be so cautious. I see Caroline nodding your or shaking your head. I don't know if you agree or not. Or it's actually just, it happens in yoga, right? And I never, until I did my 300-hour wellness, I never realized the things that were happening or the things that we were getting taught. And it's not about this is the right way or this is the wrong way. It's just notice it and learn to question everything. Because we do so many things out of habit, like don't go too far in your back or don't put your knee past your toe. But why not? You know what I mean? Just question it and just start to think about it, right?
It's also something that's dissipating in personal training now a little bit. From my course that I've just done now, there's a focus on be careful, don't hurt yourself, but much less from what I've heard trainers say to what we were actually taught, where it's not emphasized as much anymore because it's not the end of the world usually.
Well, exactly. And the student will know this is too much or this is not enough. You've established that boundary that they're in charge, it should be okay. I've been in a class where, people will do what they need to do because I'm not. I think I've even said this, I think another wording I used to use, I'm like, I'm not in your body, I don't know. So, like that's something that is quite important to establish. And I think that just, it's kind of like the whole practice of yoga is that it is yours. Yes, I'm a teacher and I'm here to facilitate it and guide it, but it's still your practice. Does anyone else have anything to add? How are you guys feeling about? I mean, like you can completely disagree, like, and spice it up if you want to. But I think it's also just, sorry, I just want to say one more thing. As was that Karen? As we are, and I'm also telling this to you guys from a teacher's perspective, because when you guys go out there and teach, there is kind of this thing about you also want to protect, probably not the right word, but protect yourself as a teacher. And if you can set that boundary and make that really clear, then I think that's quite a nice thing, that you decide this is where I draw the line. If anyone asks me about any injury, it's not oh, hey, where does it hurt? Or does it hurt when you, because as soon as you, and sorry, Zam, I'm going to come to you now, I'm on a tangent here. As soon as I say something like, does it hurt here? Where does it hurt? In which pose? Can you tell me what it feels like? Those are words that are usually attached to like diagnosing, because the way your subjective feedback, what you tell me where it hurts, why do I need to know where it hurts, right? Because I'm trying to understand the injury, and that's part of the diagnosis. As soon as I say, as soon as I try to fix it, or I say, let's do these poses because it's rehabilitative or it's strengthening your knee or whatever the case may be, that's treatment, right? It's kind of like if you guys go to physios, that's are the kind of things that they say. Doesn't mean you don't do those things in yoga anyway, but that's not our intention of the yoga. We're not here to fix or to treat. We're here to teach yoga, and each person will have their own experience of it. Just to kind of show you that, like what diagnosing and what treating sounds like. Sama, do you want to add to that?
Oh, sorry, my Wi-Fi is a bit slow, so I just stopped the video. I wanted to say, this is not exactly about the injury portion, but I was just listening to Sasha speaking about how she has fears about doing certain poses, inversions. I had my own fears about crow and those similar type of poses. But my question is, in a class, because you don't want to push the students to move past their fears if they are not ready, but you want to motivate them to at least give it a shot. How do you do that without putting that added pressure? Because if the fear is not really about an injury, it's just a fear about whatever they've heard growing up or what they've been told by a parent or friends or previous teachers. How do you do that without being too pushy? Because I've had teachers who have been a bit too pushy that caused me ended up not to even try.
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I think it's so hard to say because I would never force anyone to do anything. You offer the pose and you can say, come, let's try, you know what would really help? Or, you know, you're using, let me use crow as an example because that's nice. If you put a bolster there and say, just lean forward, you don't have to lift your toes up, break it down into small chunks, maybe lift one toe. Amazing, you lifted a toe, right? Celebrate those little stepping stones. The same thing as when you celebrated walking your feet up the wall. I think it was Demi who did the half handstand. Major victory if you're fearful, right? Even something with my older practitioners, even just lifting one leg in a balance, for them, that was a big deal. So as a teacher, I would really encourage and reinforce with positive language because I think I don't want to push you too far because it's the same thing. If you are kind of edging on fear and I push you too much, you might become totally avoidant. Nope, yoga's not for me. I'm not going to come back. It's too much. So this kind of brings in with the actual teaching skills is by breaking it down. By the time you've gotten to crow, you've brought in things like leaning, you've brought in a sensation, you've given them the idea that by the time they get there, which is one of the things I love about sequencing, is that this doesn't seem so scary because I've touched on aspects of it. But then even in that situation to say, okay, cool, let's try it out, lift one toe. Sometimes you'll even see students that'll kind of go a bit panicky. They'll be like, no. And then you just say, well done, we'll try again another time. Don't worry, that was great. And so it's honestly just reassurance. And you'll also get students in the class who have no fear and flick-flacking all over the place and like quite, drop back and handstand and hopefully you don't get that because it's very distracting for you as a teacher. But at the same time, you'll get both ends of the scale. I've had students in classes who are almost no fear, who will go and fall. And I also don't want to panic and go, oh my gosh, are you okay? Because, crows like this far off the ground, they're probably fine. I don't think I've ever had anyone have a major injury, touch wood. But that being said, you guys aren't going to walk out here and have your first class teaching headless headstand or handstand until you guys feel confident in teaching it, all right? I would also not teach it a lot especially if once you've kind of developed relationships with people, they might feel more comfortable and have more trusting to you. But when you are starting off teaching, it's just about the reassurance, giving them that option, but also reassuring them if they don't take that option. Because some people don't really care about arm balances and inversions. I've been to a couple of classes where they're like, nah, it's okay, I'm happy to watch. And they're okay with that. And that's also fine. They know what it is. They've seen it. They would do it if they want to do it. How are you guys feeling about that? Eva. Oh, sorry, you muted.
Sorry, I have a question of what you were just talking about, because I find it if I go to classes that you have only 10 people, like for example, Ashtanga class on Sunday in Kenya, it's so much easier to practice at your own space, and it's so much easier for the teacher to be encouraging and also just kind of say, this is your practice, you do whatever you need to do. But when you do it with 40, 50 students, like I find that incredibly difficult to give the encouragement that you just said, and also just harder for students to actually follow and understand that this is your own practice, you do whatever you need to do, adjust your poses accordingly. So how do you balance it when you have way too many students, which is much, much harder compared to having, only fewer in your class?
I think this is also personal to you as a teacher. Like as you guys start to teach, you will continue to refine your own teaching pace, your own style, bringing in. So, and some people feel very comfortable in large groups instructing and some don't. I find it, I've taught a couple of classes where I think the most I ever had was 60. And for me as a teacher, you take on so much responsibility because you feel like, oh, I need everyone to feel accomplished and everyone to know all the poses, and someone's here who's been practicing for 10 years and someone's here who's never done a yoga class before. How do you balance that? So for me, one of the things is that you want to give reassurance, but it doesn't always have to be individualistic. I don't know if you guys have been to classes before where they go, oh, well done, Taryn, well done, Caroline. I don't need that person. I'm like, oh, stop looking at me. You know what I mean? So but general cues to say, well done, guys, cool, good focus. It can be a little bit more generalized, but in those big classes as a teacher, you feel like your attention is all over the place, that generally you just kind of get through the class. So for me, I actually prefer teaching students that are like a group of 6 to 8. That's a really nice group, because you can watch them all in the pose and keep the flow going. The bigger it comes, obviously the bigger the class become, the less attention or focus you can give to each of individual students, and those are just you leading them through the sequence. If you don't know the pose, look at the person in front of you, you're following. More of the big yoga studios. But as you guys start to teach, I would say I think it's a really good skill to be comfortable in big groups. And this is more if you want to go out and you want to teach at a big studio, or you want to teach the odd class at a festival, for example, you are also going to want to build yourself up, because as you guys start to teach, I think I said it in the teaching skills, when you start off, you want everything to be right and everyone to understand each pose and all of those things, but you also need to maintain the flow of the class. So there's a bit of give and take to say, I'm not gonna bother giving this little cue because I also want to keep it going, which is kind of hard because you want everyone to do it right, but this kind of gets into that alignment discussion of like, why is it right? Because it looks nice. So there's almost like you have to kind of retreat a bit as a teacher and say, okay, cool, I'm here. This is what I have planned. This is my intention. This is what I'm going to do in the class today. And just hope that, hope it all goes well. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's really, those kind of classes are a lot more instructional. There's not a lot of teaching going on. It's I'm presenting a sequence, which is probably what you guys will focus on as well when you start doing your teaching skills. You are presenting a sequence, but then you've got that little portion when you get to the peak pose where you can teach, right? I don't even know if that answers your question. It's hard. Teaching big classes is hard. But it's also fun because if you're teaching at a festival or a big thing, the intention of, let's just say at a festival, the intention is I'm not here to refine my practice or suddenly get my handstand in the middle of the room or whatever the case may be. That people are there to just move and have a good time. So you will also teach a class that you feel confident and comfortable in, that you can easily get through it. Simple, very straightforward, and maybe a little bit slower. That's my go-to, because I think it's as soon as I panic or as soon as I feel uncomfortable as a teacher, that's when things get a little bit shaky. Sasha?
I just wanted to build on what Eva was saying, and that's, so with this University Yoga Society, in the beginning of the year, obviously everyone signs up, and so we have classes of like 100, 200 people. Sometimes we're turning people away at the door because the class, like this school hall, is just too full. By the end of the year, there are like 10 people because people just realize yoga wasn't for them, or they are too lazy to attend and they just don't want to anymore. And the difference between the beginning of the year and the end of the year is tremendous. It's not the same practice. And I think that's it as a teacher, not that I've taught one of those classes, but just that I would imagine you have to have a different expectation, because as a student going in the beginning of the year, I have a different expectation. I know the instructor's not going to come and adjust me, or, they're not going to be able to do that for me. And I don't want them to, I don't expect them to. As you said, I don't want them to be like, oh, nice, Sasha, because then there are 100 people around me and I would just die. So I think it depends, and your expectation, your outlook of the entire practice would have to just be different. If it's a group of 10 people or a group of 60 people, it's not the same. And I don't think you should try to make it the same, because I think that would be very stressful.
Yeah, you guys gonna go out there and teach, and you're gonna say something or do something or teach something and go, oh, okay, that didn't work. Next time I'm not gonna do it. I mean, I've got some good stories to tell you guys of things I've said and I'm like, that doesn't, or days where language is just not working for me and wording just like whew, you just have those days where you're like, English is not for me. But that's also okay. And so if you go into a class, and it's happened to me before where I've just coming back to the injury thing, is I've asked someone an injury and they've said something and I just went, I have no idea what that is. You know what? It's actually not my responsibility. I suggest you go see a physio. They'll tell you what you can and can't do. You come back to yoga and you just take care of that for you. And that also made me feel a bit more comfortable because I've made that expectation clear. That's kind of a good thing to go by. Demi, what did you want to add?
Actually, similar to what you said, I was kind of like, okay, like taking all of this in, because my perception, I'm kind of still leaning on I would like to have awareness of people's injury, but the clarity that there's nothing, it's not that I'm here to diagnose or cure or fix. I just think that what would go nicely with that would be to have a smaller class. So you could just say, as you observing, because I've been to classes like this where I've really liked it, where the teacher is observing and they will come and say, okay, well, either they'll see that you're struggling, and like for me, my knee, so I went to the class and my knee was sore, and they would say, okay, put your knee on the ground, then you can hold the pose better. And then they'll walk around and maybe somebody else has something and they do it softly, and there's a little bit of music playing and people are focused on their practice, and maybe there's like 6 to 8 people there. And they just come to you and go, drop your knee a little bit and you might feel a bit comfortable. And do you feel that? Yes, okay, hold it like that. Next time you do it, do that rather. And then move on. And it's quite quick and swift. And I, as the student, felt very attended to. And I was like, oh, I'm doing it properly. I feel like I'm doing it properly. I feel like even if my knee hurts next time, I can still come here. I don't have to feel like, oh, my knee's sore, I can't do yoga, or oh, I'm just going to sit in child's pose, but I don't want to sit in child's pose. I want to try to do some level of something. But then for me in my head, I was like, okay, maybe I, as a teacher, I would just like to do smaller classes where that space is provided, where you can give more time to individual people. And then I guess the people who like that will come to your class, and the people who don't want that will go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can even navigate that situation without asking. You just say, hey guys, listen, so I just want you guys to write this down. This is kind of what I go for. It's, you can choose, use it, lose it, whatever the case may be. But I'll say, welcome to my class. For those who don't know me, my name is Taryn. I'm here to guide you through today's practice. This is your practice. I encourage you to always listen to your body. And if you are feeling any discomfort, then back off. If you don't know how to do so, you can even leave. I wouldn't even put that in. I would just say back off. Because there might be 7 hands coming up in the class. I don't want to set myself up for some challenges. So I would end it off at that. If I'm teaching a class, if a smaller class, I've had people say, oh, my knee's sore. Then I'll say, drop your knee down. Does that feel better? Yes, that's fine. I haven't had to ask you where's it sore? What's your injury? Because I've now played my role as a yoga teacher where I've helped you modify without needing to know all the medical jargon and all of those things anyway. If I've asked them about the medical jargon and I've spoken back to say, does it hurt in flexion or extension? I've already planted that seed that they now know that I know what that means. And there's an expectation that I will now assist them more than what's appropriate or more than what's needed. So you can navigate that without even asking. And it's interesting there because Demi also said, and I used to do this, like I used to think like that quite a bit as well, as say, when I see them struggling, what are the kind of things that we would see? Like, how would we know whether someone's struggling or not?
Well, in the class that I went to, which I think that a lot of the people who go, they're very frequent. So my perception is that they enjoy it because it's the same people coming back again and again and again. Is that she will say that, there's certain things happening that if you can't make eye contact with me, and if I'm able to come to you, I will, or if you want to wait for me, wait in child's pose, and then when I come to you, when we come through that space again, then I can tell you what to do, if you want my assistance. So she does make it our responsibility to notify. But for me, like, she knows me quite well, it is a friend of mine, so I guess there's a benefit there. But I will shake in a space where she knows maybe last week I did it fine. Then she will either say, is everything okay? But very softly, and the studio is quite small, so it's actually done very discreetly and in a way that it feels like you're just being spoken to. Nobody else knows what's going on. And then I'll say, actually, yes, or no, I'm fine. And she just moves on just like that. Okay. And I just felt like very, okay, like I'm learning, I'm understanding my body, I'm learning what my limits are. Because often in yoga, like I must say, this course has helped a lot with understanding my body's limits. But in the general classes, we don't really get taught our own limits. It's kind of like there's a scope and you kind of just do those, things. And they always say, like, in your home practice, if you do this, do that. Or if you don't, you can try, but if you want to just watch it. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't know, I'm just going to watch, even if they want to try. So I just felt that was giving me body awareness. And I was able to say, oh, okay, so when that happens or something similar, then I can move into this pose and it still supports me just fine.
And that's interesting. I just want to add to that is I'm sure you guys have felt that what feels somewhat, let's put an inverted commas, easy on one day is not as easy the next day. So if someone seems like, let's say you say if you're shaky, they used to be saying like, oh, if you see that the student has lost their breath or you can see they're not breathing, then you want them to back off. But that's not always the case, because a student might be fine in the pose. They enjoy that level to which they are working. They've decided they're happy there. We also don't want to push them down and say do less, or we don't want to assume that they are struggling and or exerting themselves. We've had this even before where people say, I can see they're exerting. And I'm like, well, today I came to yoga to exert. I've decided that I'm going to get into my hand, whatever the case may be, that they've decided that. So we say, okay. And more generally, I would never, ever, and I would recommend this to never like pinpoint someone in a class to be like, Demi, I suggest putting your knee down. I would say, if you would like a modification, you can always drop your knee down. There we go. Open-ended, take it, leave it. It's up to you kind of thing. But because someone might always do their lunge this way, and today, oh, it's not feeling good. I actually want to back my knee down. Doesn't mean I can't do it, or I might want to use a prop. Doesn't mean it's making it easier. It's just today, this is a variation that works for me. That's something I like to say to students as well. It's like, what is going to serve your body best today, in today's body? Because there is that kind of, I can do this. Why am I struggling now? Why do I need to put my toes on the floor in tree pose when I can put my leg up there? Cool, it's great that you can, but today you might need something a bit differently. So everything is a suggestion, an option, opening the invitation, take it or leave it kind of thing. And I find that when you offer that in my personal experience, you guys can try it out when you start teaching, but in my experience, when I gave that offering there, then they felt empowered, they could make their own decisions, they felt like this was their practice. And at the same time, I felt a lot more comfortable teaching, because if someone even previously, when I first started teaching, said I had a niggly wrist, I found myself zoning in on that and being like, oh, what am I going to do for your wrist? But they're probably fine. But you kind of feel like you need to do more. And that's not the case. It's almost like sometimes not knowing is better. And not from a point that we don't care or that we don't want to. It's just more about keeping your own peace of mind as a teacher. And really it comes down to just understanding our scope of practice, because you guys will see now as you go out there, so many people saying like therapy and come and yoga for this and yoga for that and yoga for this. And if they have any previous experience, fine, but scope of practice is like super duper key. And I think we need to, it's kind of also how we can be ethical, is knowing what role we serve and how we can do that really well. And if you disagree with me, that's also fine. Karen.
How would you handle an energy vampire in the class that just wants your attention because it has all these injuries?
You guys will come across interesting students as you start teaching. Like I've literally been in a class before, and I was just teaching a class and someone was like, handstand, drop back, handstand. And I was like, I wasn't even teaching handstand nor drop back. So they just decided they were just going to do their own thing today. And you will have students who will do their own thing. You'll have students that will, it's completely up to you, pet peeve, like talking in a class. Like, sometimes you're like, and just notice the stretch on the right side. What does it feel like? Notice it here. And they're like, they don't know it's rhetorical, so they'll speak out, which is also fine. A lot of new people, but you will get interesting students that will come to their class, and you will decide, I'm okay with this or I'm not okay with this. But it is generally a very blanket statement I will use. If they interrupt your class and say, oh, my knee is sore, then I will, it's interesting. I think I'll walk towards them and say, drop your knee down. Does it feel better? Yes, cool. Carry on, move on with your life. And then if it was happening recurringly, oh, I'm not quite sure what I would do. I think it would be a mix as to see how often it happened and whether it continued from one class to the next, because I also don't want to call a student out after class and say, look, let's sort this out now and you can take control, because we also don't want to pinpoint people. We don't really want to call them out. We don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's, as a teacher, you need to set that boundary that this is what you need to do. I don't think I have an answer as yet. What do you guys think you'll do? Great learning opportunity. It also depends on the personality of that student. You know, you might say, modified here, if you need any assist, if something else comes up, just raise a hand or whatever the case may be. And someone might call you quite a bit. And I think, once again, reinforce, listen to your body, make an adjustment that works for you, trust your body, you know, trying to get them to shift that focus onto their own decisions. And if she comes to you after class, or he comes to you after class and asks again, then I would say, look, in the class, we might not be able to modify all these things. We might not be able to do that. This is what I encourage. This is what I think. Try it out for the next class, see if it works for you. And I would always just put that focus back on them. I've never had it in a class, surprisingly. I've had talkers, I've had chatty people, but I haven't had anyone, surprisingly, that demanded too much attention, which is quite interesting. So I hope maybe that's the case for you. Demi?
I wanted to ask, so what if you as the teacher have an injury and you can't do a certain move? I don't even know how to word this properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an expectation that you should be able to do these things, you know, but what if you can't? And for me, who sometimes injuries come up and sometimes they are fine and sometimes they last a week and sometimes they never show up for like a month. Is that something that, you know, can affect the class negatively? Or is it kind of like, this is just how I am today, I can still instruct you or teach you? Does it affect the teaching?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned in the teaching, especially in the beginning when I used to demo quite a bit, we spoke about this, is your body also takes a bit of strain. You don't go through the same sequencing as them, and then suddenly you tend to just demo the peak pose, right? You haven't gone through that same 45 minutes of progressively warming up, and so you kind of just hop into it. So when I was taught, and maybe you guys, I'm just going to mention this because I just want to see if you guys have heard it before, but when I was taught, it was, and this was only like 4 or 5 years ago, I was told if you can't do it, you shouldn't teach it, right? But now understanding the anatomy and knowing that I don't think my hips are the kind that are going to get into lotus doesn't mean I'm not going to teach lotus for someone who it comes a lot more naturally to them. There's options, right? We understand that. And so I would invite that option and then take my variation. And I think in doing that, I'm also showing them that I also don't have the perfect yoga practice, because there is no such thing. So you kind of set that expectation as well. But at the same time, you are not going to be demoing the whole class. So you can even instruct just verbally, just with your, with your words. You might try to create a certain idea for them, and you don't have to do the whole class with them. You might even, if you're working with a major thing like I don't even know, major injury, but that implicated quite a bit, you might just adjust your sequences to not do a lot of that for a couple of weeks. I mean, you're in charge of what you teach, which is the best bit. So that's kind of the nice thing about it. But I would really recommend like looking after your body as a teacher too, having your practice, but also just being able to take care of yourself in the class as well. Sasha says her favorite class was when the teacher couldn't do a pose fully. And yeah, that was one of the things I just want to end off with. We're going to take a break now. I see a couple of videos are going off. It might be loo break. But yeah, I was always told, like, if you can't do wheel, don't teach it. And I said, I can, if I understand it, if I can sequence towards it, and if I can cue into it, I don't need to show them the pose in order for them to know it or to do it. All right. So I think that understanding, and we know that now, sometimes you might be like, my body is just not going to do the shape, might not do it now, might not do it ever. And I'm okay with that. And so it shows the students they can be okay with that too. Before we take a break, is there anyone that has a question on the yoga for injury kind of thing? Do I feel like we've changed a couple of minds? Are you guys still a little bit on the fence? Maybe you're stuck in your ways. Are you feeling confident going out there, knowing how to handle certain situations or knowing how to open up that class or to set that? Do you feel that makes you a bit more comfortable? Cool. Any last little questions about that? Cool. Let's take I'm going to give you guys a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 6:35 and we'll get into prenatal. This is the fun bit. Go get your preggy bellies, which is just a pillow. You can choose whether you're 3 months along or 8 months along. And then just bring a t-shirt. And then you don't have to be set up by your mat. We're going to be on and off, but just have your stuff handy. All right.
Taryn, will you need to see me? I'm busy moving and like my furniture's everywhere and my boxes are everywhere. So is it okay if I'm here and then I'm off the camera?
That's fine. That's fine. It's more
okay.
fun.
Thank you.
See you guys in 10 minutes.